New little Joan
Oh,
Chittister.
I'll have to get it. Yeah, I
Hey
didn't know she had a
everybody.
new book out.
I see the little alert that we are live, and we are so glad that you're with us here. I'm pumped. I'm so excited that we've got Kirsten Powers with us tonight. Whoop, whoop. Hey. And here is her book. If you haven't read it, it's okay. We always say, even if you haven't done your homework, you're welcome. So I'm going to get to this in just a minute. I mean, this is what we're going to do for the next hour. So it's so good to see you, Kirsten.
It's so great to see you.
On just a few things as folks join in, we're bringing all you all in that are in the Zoom machine. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or anything else, you can join the Zoom link directly. And a lot of times we have a little after party and hang out for a minute. So we like to see your comments in the chat too. So say hi, everybody, as you come in here and tell us where you're coming from. A couple of things that are going on in the near future this month. We got a lot going on in December, y'all, with Red Letter Christians. We've got on the first day of every month, we do morning prayer together. We just kicked off this season of Advent. And so we're going to do a morning prayer on December 1st. And you can join us directly on the link, and we can hang out and pray together at 9 o'clock in the morning. And then we've got we're going to do some caroling. Kirsten, do you like caroling?
I do.
We're going to do a little virtual caroling on the December 16th date in the evening. So wear your red and green and bring your best voice. And there's actually some people that may be out actually caroling and others that are just bringing a guitar. It's kind of informal, but we'll tell you all about that. And next month, the book that we're going to be doing is by Diana Butler Bass, Freeing Jesus. Have you read that one, Kirsten?
Yeah, I think I blurbed it.
You blurbed it, of course you did. So so there's other stuff. We're going to do something around Sandy Hook too, around this incredible film. We are all Newtown, and so you'll hear more about all that stuff. Lots going on in the month of December, which is upon us. But tonight, this is what we are talking about, y'all. Saving Grace. I love your book, Kirsten, and I just wanted to say, first of all, it's really personal. And so I feel like before we dive in, I just want to say thank you for being vulnerable. And I mean, parts of it are so raw that you talk about how it was. A lot of this is affected by the culture wars, the divisions and all of this kind of, we take it on, and you in particular as a political commentator, a wonderful one, but also like you're I mean, everything's built around division and dualism. And at one point you said that, you had even had at one night cracked a molar because you were clenching your teeth so tightly.
Yes.
So, you share real personally. And so I first wanted to just say thanks. And also for folks that haven't read it, maybe invite you to share how this book kind of chose you. You wrote it out of your own kind of survival story.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, they say you write the book that you need. And I think that, a lot of people said, why did you write this? And I feel like it was necessity. Necessity is the mother of invention. And I got to a point where I was just, I'd say post 2016, a couple of years in, it was towards the end of 2018. And I just looked at myself and I was, exhausted, angry, filled with rage, contempt. I mean, you name it. I think a lot of people can relate, right, to what a lot of us were feeling. And I just was like, this isn't sustainable. I can't keep doing this. And it wasn't helping me and it wasn't helping anybody else. I think if I could have said, well, at least this is helpful to causes that I care about, but it wasn't, right? Yeah. And so, and that I also had this sort of, come to Jesus moment where I realized my sort of soundtrack in my head about other people, the way I was thinking about other people, the way I was sometimes talking about other people, the way I was behaving on social media at times, was not aligned with my values. And it wasn't aligned with what I said I believed. And so, I had to ask myself, do I really believe in loving my neighbor? Do I really believe in loving my enemies? Because I'm really not acting like I believe that. And I had to really ask myself, do I really believe this? Because now this is where the rubbers met the road.
Yeah.
And this is the first time where I've had to really, really struggle with this in a serious way. And I decided I do want to be aligned and I want to make a shift. And this book ended up being the story of me making that shift.
Mm, mm. I don't know if you remember this, but we were together at Focus on the Family, right?
I do. Yeah.
And what I thought was so beautiful about that, I mean, that's not where maybe everyone would think you and I got to hang out, but it was a really diverse group of people. And I remember they said, you're invited here because you are influential and you are humble. And that was the main criteria. I mean, we could, I think they were saying, we're trying to invite people that play well with others. But as you set the context for your book, in the beginning, you talk about how polarized we are. I mean, not just polarized, but it's like we used to think people had bad ideas. Now we think that they are bad, right? And one of the things you said early on is that both parties see the about 40% of the people say that the other party is downright evil. 15% of Republicans, 20% of Democrats said that we'd all be better off if a large number of the other party just died. I mean, those are pretty brutal realities, right?
Yeah.
Like and you do a great job at talking about how we got to this kind of new iteration of hostility, that like the other person is evil and they'd be better off just dead. I mean, that's pretty crazy, but I don't know if you want to say a little bit about how it's really gotten worse, and this is kind of the toxic environment that you were in, as a political commentator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Look, I mean, polarization has been going on for a while, and obviously we've had division. So that's not a brand new thing, but Trump did usher in a new era. And I think a lot of that was his style, frankly. And it gave people permission to behave in ways that just used to be considered sort of not acceptable. And so we weren't really, at least for me and my job, whereas in the past I would be discussing or debating differing viewpoints on policies, for example. We weren't really doing that anymore. We were now disputing like reality. Right. And so it moved into a very different kind of space. And I think it was something that a lot of people were experiencing, a lot of confusion, a lot of sense of betrayal. I think particularly for, a lot of evangelicals who were looking at other evangelicals saying like, how could you support this? There just was a lot of confusion, right? And a lot of, it was a uniquely difficult situation. And so I think we just became further divided in a way that we haven't been in a very, very long time. I'm sure there are other points in history where we have, but not in my lifetime. Not in my adult lifetime. I mean, I can't speak to what was happening when I was a child, but I don't think it was happening. But in my adult lifetime, I have never, I mean, I've been doing I've been working in the media political world for almost 30 years, And at no point did I ever stop and think, are we going to have a civil war, like an actual war with guns? Because that's kind of what this feels like we're headed towards. And so we're in a very, very different kind of situation. And on the face of it, it would seem like, why would I be talking about grace, right? When you say that, because people think, and even I in the beginning sort of thought that. I thought, well, grace, like, is grace really what we need? Like, this is war and everybody needs to like suit up and go to war, right? But the truth is, this is exactly what grace is for. Yeah. This is exactly what loving your enemies is for. It's not for people who you disagree with around the margins, right? Like, it's not for the person who you disagree with on the tax rate. It's for these really deep fundamental issues, and that ultimately it's how you preserve your own humanity in the process. right?
Yeah, and you talk about Philip Yancey saying, it's talking about how there's a lot of ungrace out there, and in the book you said 16% of Americans have stopped talking to a family member in the last few years, over 16%, right? And we just came out of Thanksgiving, lots of awkward conversations and whatnot. But the other thing you said is 63% of people, no matter what their politics are, 63% have no interest in dating someone that has a different view of Trump than they do. So in some ways, Trump has become kind of this line in the sand, and represents so many things bigger than him or his brand. But when you talk about grace, maybe we should say a little bit about what grace is and what grace is not, because you do such a great job at saying, grace is not passivity, it's not false unity or lack of accountability or this kind of toxic positivity of just kumbaya, but it actually is much deeper than that. And maybe tell us a little bit, like you do in the book, of what grace looks like and what it doesn't look like.
Yeah. And I think, an important thing to say up front is that grace can actually be a kind of triggering word for a lot of people because A, it's misunderstood, and B, it's been weaponized and used against people, and particularly used against people who've been harmed, right? So people who belong to marginalized groups, people who've been harmed in the church, things where they've been basically told, just have grace, we're all sinners, we're all human, this spiritual bypassing, rather than actually having accountability and holding people responsible. And so we have to acknowledge up front that this has been abused, but that's not what grace is. So grace is unmerited favor. If I use the Christian tradition's definition of it, we think of it usually as coming from God, but what does it look like when we extend that to each other? So it's a gift. It's something that nobody has to earn. And so it is for people who you don't like. It's for people who you may even feel like you hate, right? And then that's the point. It's not. So when some people said to me, well, I can have grace for people who are like basically think the way I think, but like for those other people, I can't do it. And I said, but that's not grace, because you just gave me a reason that you're giving it to them. So that's not unearned. It's actually for that person that you can't think of a single nice thing to say about, right? And so in a more secular way, I say grace creates space for people to not be you. So that means other people get to think things, do things, vote for people, and do all these other things without you demonizing or dehumanizing them. Doesn't mean that you have to like them, doesn't mean you have to be in a relationship with them. It's just more about seeing the humanity in them, or if you're a believer, just saying, I see God in you, even if I cannot understand how you could say or do the things that you're doing, and I find them harmful. And if somebody is causing harm, they're held accountable, right? But that is grace. Like accountability is grace. Like that's what's not grace is annihilation, which is what we see a lot, very well in the criminal justice system. A lot of times what people call accountability is annihilation. It's not proportionate to what the person did. It's not restorative. Right. It's just vengeful and nasty and racist and all these other things, right? So we have to understand that there is a way with grace to hold people accountable and have consequences. But when it comes to just having disagreements around serious issues, very serious issues, it is saying to that person, you know what, you get to think that, and I'm not going to dehumanize you. And we are dehumanizing each other. We have to be honest about that. We are othering each other. And that's how polarization works, because the social science shows, and I have this in the book, that if they want to depolarize a person, what they do is they ask them to think of somebody they know. So versus asking, what do you think about Democrats if you're a Republican, or what do you think about Republicans if you're Democrats, where they might say, we'd be better off if they were dead. I want you to think of one person who belongs to the other party that you like and respect. They immediately start depolarizing.
Yeah, that's right.
Because they see the whole person. They're not dehumanized, right? And so that's the thing. It's basically saying, I'm going to use grace as this kind of buffer, basically, to see you in a way that I might not naturally see you.
Yeah. So just in case y'all are joining us, this is Kirsten Powers' book, Saving Grace. And I also saw in the chat that Sharon Risher's with us, who's one of my heroes when it comes to grace, Kirsten. Her mother was killed in Emmanuel AME in Charleston, South Carolina. Her family was killed by Dylan Roof. And yet she's one of these powerful forces for grace, and I've learned so much from her about it. And one of the things that she says is that it's not that you forgive and forget, you forgive and remember. The scars are always there. And that's the power of grace. And, as I'm reading your book on it, you kind of go back and forth between the personal and the social, the big issues of death penalty, criminal justice, but also like your own life and your interactions with people that I think, what do you say, are committed to misunderstanding you?
Yeah.
But you give a lot of these good examples, and one of them that is worth remembering, because we have so many of the bad stories, but you gave the example of Scalia and Ginsburg, and it's one that is probably familiar to some of us, that these two justices that were on the opposite side of almost every issue had this endearing friendship, went on vacations together. But it's also interesting because at the memorial service for Scalia, Ginsburg said he was once asked how he could be friends, given that their disagreements are so big on so many things. And Scalia answered, "I attack ideas. I don't attack people. Some very good people have some very bad ideas." And she probably would have said the same thing about him, but then, you look at that, you gave this just the next page when he was taking flowers to her for her birthday, and it sounded like one of the interns or something was to deliver these 24 roses, and is basically like, what good have all these roses done, that you've given Ginsburg, and name one case that, maybe she's taking your side. And Scalia said, some things are more important than votes. So it's not that they took anything less seriously. And that's one of the things that you really insist on, is it doesn't mean that you tone down your passions or your convictions on these issues, but we can communicate them in a way that maybe wins them over to us rather than pushes them away, right?
Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't, they're a good example of, like, I don't know that they ever changed each other's mind on a single thing. Though she says, that he made her arguments better. His criticisms actually, when he would mark up her, what she had written, and she'd say, wow, and vice versa, that they really were sharpened by the other person. And I talk about Mark Meadows and Elijah Cummings, also being friends, which is just utterly mind-blowing to me. I mean, Mark Meadows is, he's a member of the Freedom Caucus, and was Trump's chief of staff, and Elijah Cummings is a Democratic, African-American member of Congress. And, so there are these unlikely relationships that end up occurring precisely because of what I was just talking about, is that they're more than what they believe, right? They are, and when we think about the other party in the abstract, they're not really people.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and because we have most of us now live in our little bubbles where we never encounter other people that are different than us, then that means we have to rely on the caricatures in the media and on social media and the very one-dimensional, images of people to decide what the other party is like or what they believe. And so we usually see the worst. But even when we're looking at the worst, I think grace is this paradigm where you can look at the worst and still say you're more than that terrible thing you just did. Yeah. Right? It's there's possibility in you that exists independent of anything that you've done or said or how I feel about you. And I do have to keep coming back to the fact that oh shoot.
That's all right.
Yeah.
We got you.
Yeah. That, what was so amazing to me was once I gave up, and it was a hard process, but giving up the judging and the labeling and the contempt and all of these things, of course, the person who was benefiting was me. Because the people who I had been holding in contempt and judging had no idea that I was doing that, right? Like, how are they being harmed, really? I was the one who was, just having my insides corroded by this. And I interviewed Ruby Sales for the book, civil rights icon. And she said, I said, what would you say to people who say, like, I can't not hate, so-and-so, we know who. And she said, once you hate another, you have given up control over your destiny. And, you've allowed them to invade your inner light. And that really spoke to me. Like, that was like, yes, like these people have now come inside of me. They have hijacked my entire emotional state, how I'm thinking. And so grace became this way to really keep they're over here with doing their things, and I'm over here doing my things. Their things belong to them that don't belong to me. Right.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
when I don't judge them, judging them just brings all their stuff over to me. And so instead I use grace and I use boundaries, and I just say, that's yours, not mine. And now I'm going to go do something that's going to actually address the problem that I'm upset about.
Yeah.
That's not going to involve demonizing anybody or dehumanizing anybody. It's going to be actually doing something proactive.
Yeah. So as you're talking about that, and the fact that, like, knowing someone that is a part of the other party, or, I mean, a lot of us would try to say that we're not really a part of a party. We want to transcend the parties, but we definitely, I think most of us know where we lean on different things, and we don't know many people that feel radically different than us. Or, I think, like, when you said that, I thought of my friend Michael McRae. I don't know if you've seen his work, but one of the things that he does is he gets people together who have very different views, and I don't think they usually know each other, but they tell their story to each other. And then the one who just heard the story repeats it, what they heard back, and eventually they're exchanging their lives together, right? And they end up, in the end, the person who's sitting across from the other one tells the story first person. And he told me about this encounter where a woman who was had her son had been killed from guns, and I mean, just this wrenching story. Of course, with so many similar to it. But the other man across from her was a real gun guy, NRA card carrying guy, and so they share their story with each other, and then eventually this man is telling her story first person, and it just shook him, and he kind of, like, broke down in that moment. And I thought, that your book is kind of an invitation to be creative, that we're going to have to get into each other's heads and into each other's hearts. Even if we disagree, maybe we can see where the other person's coming from. And you use this language that I think you got from Professor Loretta Ross, calling in the calling out culture. And I thought that was helpful language. Just maybe say a little bit more about, how we live in a call out culture that's all about, canceling, shutting down, ostracizing others. And yet there is a way to kind of call people into their better selves, right?
Yeah. So Loretta Ross is a professor at Smith College, and she teaches classes. She's very left-wing person, and she teaches, these pretty liberal students about what she calls calling in. And which is basically, before you call somebody out, because let's be honest, sometimes people do need to be called out, right? You try to call them in. So give them the opportunity to change their behavior or to become aware that they're doing something wrong versus shaming them, right? So you see somebody on Twitter doing something, rather than retweeting it and getting everybody to pile on, maybe send them a direct message and be like, hey, can we talk? This is, a little problematic. And, a lot of times people actually don't know that what they're doing is problematic. And so give them an opportunity to do better. I think that, the one thing I want to be careful about is I think that we have two things going on. We have something that's called cancel culture, which is often people being held accountable for behavior that's been ignored for too long. And then the question is, I think, what does accountability look like? Is accountability them being suspended? Is it them losing their job? And, sometimes that's what happens. And then sometimes what happens is, like I said earlier, it looks more like annihilation. It's like, they're not just being suspended. They're not just in extreme cases, maybe they need to lose their job, but it's not just that they're losing that job, it's that they now are probably going to not ever be able to get another job. It's just, it's not humane, right? No matter how bad what they did was. But the tension, I think, is that people from marginalized groups of people, whether it's women, trying to get attention for, sexual harassment or sexual assault, or whether it's, Black people trying to get attention for around police brutality, have been ignored for so long, that they've been pushed into this situation where the only way to get people's attention is capitalism, basically, right? It's to say, okay, we've tried everything else and you're not going to listen to us. You don't like kneeling, you don't like marching, you don't like any of the things. So now what we're going to do, I guess, is we're going to make your stock price drop. Or we're gonna this person's gonna have to lose their job, or see what I'm saying? So there's two sides to it. And if we want this to stop, we have to, yes, on the one hand, try to practice grace, but on the other hand, we've got to address these issues, because if we don't address these issues, then people are going to be desperate to get attention. And then that these things are going to happen.
Yeah. I was, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, a little bit more on the dualistic thinking that you go into this quite a bit in the book, but that there's a study that was out of Harvard where they talked about how we have the two-party system, and the only thing that the two parties have agreed on is that they don't want a third party, and the rules, and the rules that would prohibit a third party from arising, right? They agree on that. And so they said, almost every other part of our, capitalistic culture, if you had airplanes, two airlines that were crashing planes all the time, a new airline would arise, and every other industry. And yet, our statistics are that people's satisfaction rate with their politicians is at, just tanking, and at the same time the re-election rate is skyrocketing. So we're re-electing people that we're increasingly dissatisfied by. It's like this doesn't make any sense. But you help me think about why it's that way, because you talked a little bit about the fact that we're kind of politically segregated, right? So even though the election was close, 60% of voters live in a county where it was won by a landslide. So we live in pockets of political segregation, even as our whole country's really divided. And so you get this kind of perception gap. And you talked about that in the book, where, we actually don't even know what the other people believe. One of the examples you gave is that Americans believe about 40% of Republicans make more than $250,000 a year, when the realistic fact is that it's 2%, right?
Yeah.
Some of these ideas of this is who Republicans are, this is who Democrats are, and it's increasingly not even true, right? So
No, and I think that and then the fact that people get their news from segregated sources, and so you're operating in two completely different realities about, and you're only hearing the worst things about what the other people do. And then I think that, it's like in a parliamentary system, people can pick a party that more closely aligns with what they believe, right? So you can say, well, I belong to this party, and someone might go, oh, I have a pretty good sense of what this person believes. But when you have two parties and all these people have to either choose one of these two parties, the idea that we would know who a person is based on that decision is insane. Yeah. And yet people will say, I know, all I need to know is who they voted for, or all I need to know is what party they belong to. And I know they're this, and that. And it's like, but they're not. That's not the way that it works. The way that it works is people belong to parties. They tend to vote with their party. That's what happens, right? And so it's, and a lot of times, we're particularly seeing this now, is that people are more motivated by opposing the other party than supporting their own party.
Yeah, so you hate the other party more than you love your own. You said. Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
So it's actually like they've been so convinced that the other party is going to do such grave harm that no matter how badly people in their own party behave, it doesn't matter, because they've been so convinced that the other party is so much worse than that. And so it becomes the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about the social media, because I think it's even more extreme there. I mean, one of the things I didn't even know is, I think if I got this right, that only 22% of Americans are even on Twitter. So, I mean, and that's helpful even just to think about, right? So like less than a quarter of Americans even use Twitter, adults on that. And then, but 6% of folks are responsible for 73% of the political content. So you got a few folks that are really hyper vigilant, and they're framing the narrative, they're defining the terms, they're kind of, and you, I mean, you're that's your world. So, but
Yeah.
what you, at one point you said you really had to just kind of redefine, you had to redefine your relationship with Twitter, right?
Yes. Well, yeah, because it's not a reflection of the real world. It doesn't mean it's not a reflection of important things, because I do think that sometimes the most engaged people also can at times be the most informed, but there's also just social science that shows that people who consume the most information often are worse at like guessing what the other party believes than somebody who consumes no information, right? So
I
no
found it.
news.
My wife is totally like,
Yeah.
doesn't do Facebook, Twitter, doesn't really even like watching the news. And when you said, you said exactly that, the most accurate information is held by people who are the most politically disengaged.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
Because they're not all hyped up on all this outrage and like I said, these caricatures of what the other side believes. And so for me, I realized that Twitter was just absolutely toxic for me. And I talk a lot in the book about coming to terms with some of my trauma that drove me into like extremely dualistic black and white thinking, which we all naturally do for a variety of reasons, for cultural reasons, for brain science reasons. And then you added in my trauma. And Twitter is just a really graceless black and white kind of place, right? And so I just got locked in on that, and it really brought out my evil twin. There's just no question. And I realized I had to get off of it, and I got off of it for a long time. I mean, probably a year or so or more, going on here and there, but hardly being on. I've been on a little bit more lately. It's interesting. Once I went through all the things I talked about in the book, all the therapy and, spiritual work and all these different things, I'm actually now able to stay very grounded and go on, and it doesn't pull me around. But it used to really have a lot of control over me because I was giving too much access to my inner being, and now I'm much better at kind of looking at that and just being like, no, that's not okay. But I think you also, I now also can see that there are a lot of traumatized people that are acting out as well, the same way I used to. And so you don't take it personally. You're just like, okay, that's a person who's in pain, or that's a person who's, probably should be talking to their therapist, not on Twitter. If we're being honest. And I'm saying this as a person who that's where I was, and that's what I needed to do. So, but I don't feel the contempt that I used to feel or those kinds of things.
So good. And by the way, if y'all are just tuning in, this is Kirsten Powers and Saving Grace, what we're talking about. And you gave a good example of this, is that Sarah Silverman, right? She was the one that did the mouth overs of the Trump things, right? It just fantastic. She's a comedian. She's wonderful. But she got a really terrible, I didn't read it, but you said it was just nasty. You probably didn't even want to repeat it. Misogynistic, nasty tweet. And she went back and looked at the person's timeline and tried to like humanize them, maybe, right? Like look into that. And she found that they had health problems, that they, had this back problem and all this stuff. And so this is Sarah Silverman. She said on her Twitter feed, "I believe in you." And this is to the person that wrote the nasty email. "I see what you're doing, and your rage is thinly veiled pain. I know this feeling. So see what happens when you choose love. I see it in you," right? She's like, you can do this, right? But then it goes on that he responded by pouring out his heart and his problems, and she offered him encouragement. She leaned in, didn't run away, right? But didn't back down, like, didn't like just turn a blind eye to what he did, but ended up eventually creating some support for him to get therapy and to get medical help for his back. And in the end, he wrote, thank you to all the support financially, emotionally, all the donations. This is more than I could have wished for. Thank you, everyone. You showed me a lot within a few days. Love you all. And
Yeah.
I thought that, I mean, that's a great story. And it's also
It's a
a
beautiful
story of
story.
courage, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, she's a real, I mean, I really admire her a lot. And I think that she actually shows this kind of grace a lot. And what's so amazing about it is also she's an atheist.
Mhm.
Right. I mean, so you look at the way Christians are behaving so often in the public sphere, right? And yet here is this, Jewish atheist woman who is like just exhibiting like unconditional love and grace, like and then I can look at other Christians who actually would even argue with me about whether or not they should even try to do what I'm talking about doing right now, right? Who actually
Yeah.
would say, well, the other people this, the other people that. It's,
So we've got a few minutes left, and I want to say to folks that are on the Zoom, please put any questions or comments. Some of you have already been doing this in the chat, and those of you that are on Facebook or other platforms, you can write it in the messages too. And some of the folks on our team are looking at that. We'll try to interact with some of those. But I want to talk about the towards the end of the book, you really move us towards some of the healing that can happen. And you're speaking out of your own experience, your own life. But I love the line that when you're talking about humility, you said, while it is possible that you are right about everything, it is not very probable. And but not many of us, like we really want to believe that we are right about everything. And you've said that we reward certainty, like no one, you don't go on to CNN and someone asks you something, you say, I don't know, I'm not really sure how I feel about that yet. But yet, like, that humility is, I mean, it's at the heart of our faith as Christians. And I think at the heart of what it means, I mean, even has the same root as human, it's like that we're to admit that we may not know everything, and that someone else may be right about, even if we disagree with them on 90%, let's look for the 10% that we might be able to build on together. And so I don't know if you want to say more about humility, but it sure seems like something that the world's starved for right now.
Yeah, I don't think that you can really practice grace without humility, because if you really do believe that you're right about everything, which a lot of us do believe, I mean, that's something I had to really contend with. That, I'm sure I would have said, well, I'm not right about everything, but I certainly acted like I was right about everything, and that if you can't imagine that the other person could be right, or that the other person maybe is wrong, but isn't malicious or isn't stupid or isn't, all of these other things that we put on them because they believe these other things, right? Then how do you show grace to them, right? Because you've already labeled and judged them and done all these things. And so you have to be willing to entertain the idea that you could be wrong, that you could be missing something, that or that put in the same circumstance as this person, with the same, being raised in the same family, being exposed to the same traumas, living in the same town, having the same education, that you would somehow be a radically different person, right? You have to be realistic about the fact there before the grace of God go I, right?
Yeah.
And if you can look at other people with that humility of realizing that, you are the product of a lot of different things that maybe this person didn't have access to, that also will give you humility. And so it's, I quote a social scientist, and they're saying, like, you always need to ask, what am I not seeing? Is it possible that I'm wrong here? Approach things with curiosity.
Yeah, I like the curiosity piece. You mentioned that a few times, and you see that in Jesus, this kind of childlike faith, this innocence, the curiosity that we need intellectually, right? And you also mentioned in the book, if you what would we do if we met ourselves 20 years ago? We might want to like piece out of that conversation really quick, For those of you that are 20 years old, I don't know what that says to you. Just to be careful how sure we are in every conviction we have, because on a lot of these things, I was on the other side of these issues, on gun violence and the death penalty, so many things. And last week I got to experience that a little bit with Russell Moore. Has done this new show. He's formerly one of the leaders, one of the most charismatic leaders really in the Southern Baptist world, and he started this show, Tell Me Where I'm Wrong. I thought that's wonderful, and he's bringing people on that he knows he disagrees with, but he believes deserve a hearing, and want to like, and he didn't even argue. He just said, there might be pieces of this that I'm not seeing, tell me where I'm wrong. So I thought that's a good example,
Yeah. And look, and to be clear, there are some things that I don't think are up for debate. Like, I'm sure you don't think are up for debate, right? We're not debating, like, is it okay to harm other people? Of course not. Is racism okay? No, of course not. Is misogyny okay? No. So sometimes, dualistic thinking is very helpful, right or wrong kind of, thinking. I think what we're getting at here is more about can you put a person in such a category? And I think that's when we try to use that all or nothing, you're either all good or all bad kind of thinking around people. It doesn't really work. It's not, that's just not, and I don't think that's how any of us would want to be judged, right? Yeah. Do I want to be judged by my stupidest thing I've said, worst thing I've done? And again, this goes back to humility. People have to get real with themselves, because you do see people being like, I would never do this, or I would never do that. It's like, okay, you never did that, but you did do something. Yeah. You have hurt somebody in your life. You have done something wrong. And, we have to be honest with ourselves about that. And, and how often have we gotten grace? That was another thing I really was overwhelmed by when I was writing the book, of how much grace I have experienced in my life.
Yeah, that's a good word. Boy, one of the things that you made really clear is how hard a time we have changing our minds on something. And there's one point where you basically said, in the partisan brain thing, you were talking about that, like, one of the only ways people change their mind is if they're incentivized, like if you actually paid them to go and look at some of their views. I thought that was a little discouraging, but like a really interesting idea. We're going to pay you to like change your mind on something that you like.
Well, what it is when they're doing studies, I think what happens is people are just reflexively answering. They're not really thinking until you give them an incentive. And then they are like, oh, I want the money, so I have to actually really think, has crime gone down? And so, because typically people will say crime has gone down if their person is in the White House, but if their person isn't, so it's not connected to reality. But then when they incentivize them, then they'll actually stop and think about it. And I think that speaks to a really important thing that that also helps you have grace for people, is that we're so driven by our unconscious. And I don't think people understand that enough, of how much we operate in autopilot and how much other people are operating in autopilot. And so a lot of things that people are doing, they're not even totally conscious that they're doing them. They're just doing, sort of the story you were sharing about the guy who then told this, had to tell the story from the other person's story. It shook him, woke him up, right? It's like awakened his conscience, because he was just an autopilot, which is his autopilot always had been, I assume, gun rights, right? And something has to come in and interrupt that and kind of shake you out of your slumber a little bit, where you go, oh. And so we have to be really aware of the fact that we do that, and that other people are doing that. And so it's not that people have necessarily really thought through everything that they're saying or doing.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, I've got just a couple more questions, and then if
Okay.
there's anything that we didn't talk about that you want to, we got enough time. But y'all
Okay.
feel free to put I thought your comment really overlapped with what we were just saying, Jennifer. That are the hosts on these news stations, are they expressing their own thoughts, or is it much more just entertainment that they are maybe not quite as extreme as they are on TV? So I don't know if you want to say anything to that.
Well, I mean, for the hosts don't really, I mean, they're just hosting the show. Maybe they mean the guests who are coming
Yeah.
on. And I do think I talk about in the book that I did get really frustrated sometimes with some of the Trump people who I'd be on with, who would then tell me later, oh, I just had to say that because, he can't handle any kind of disagreement. And it's like, that's not okay. Like, it's not that they're acting, it's just that they were afraid of, getting his wrath, I guess, or something. So, but, in my experience, most people are saying what they believe. And so it's not, I don't think, I wouldn't say people are going on for entertainment purposes. I'd say that maybe the most nefarious thing that's happening would be that they're pushing an ideology or they're pushing a political view, right? Which is that maybe they're saying something that they don't necessarily believe because it supports their candidate or something like that. But in my experience, most people are saying what they actually believe.
Yeah. So those are a couple more of my questions, where one of them is with, you mentioned at the end, time's limited, and you kind of pull us into the place where Jesus says, don't throw your pearls to the swine. So like time is precious. Our energy is precious. So not everybody warrants a conversation. And I think even, in mail here in my office, I have a way that I triage letters. Right. And so if someone's disagreeing with me, and it's pretty clear that they just want to throw it all out there, I'm not going to change their mind, their letter goes to the back of the pile. But if someone disagrees with me and they're asking genuine questions and it feels like they're really got that curiosity, it actually goes to the front of the pile, along with letters that are from folks that are incarcerated, folks that have been really hurt by the church. There's a number of ways I triage. So I'm wondering how you kind of prioritize the conversations that are worth having and the people that are, the right ones to have those conversations with. Because I'm sure you're sorting through a lot of that in your personal life, but also your professional life.
Well, it's very similar to what you do. And that's what I advise other people to do as well, whether it could be a family member, right? You go home for Thanksgiving and you've got the cousin who just wants to fight and is just not interested in really hearing what you have to say. That's where I would say, don't throw your pearls before swine, meaning that, a pig doesn't know the difference between a pile of dirt or pearls, right? They'll just crush both of them exactly the same. So you only really want to be giving to people who can receive it and who want to receive it. You're not obligated to sit there and be spoken to with contempt and gaslit and all of these other things. So you have to be discerning about that. You have to look and say, is this a person who's actually interested in having a conversation? Another thing you could do in a situation like that is use boundaries and just say, hey, this is already getting a little too heated. I'm happy to talk to you about this. We obviously don't disagree, but let's set some boundaries around how we're going to communicate with each other. And so boundaries are the biggest tool that you can use if you want to practice grace, because when you don't use boundaries, that's where you end up automatically going to judgment and contempt and resentment and all these other things. When you use boundaries, you don't need to go down that road. You can just say, hey, whoa, we're not doing this. And it's like, you don't have to go to the next step of, you're a horrible person, I can't believe you, da, da, da. You don't even have to. Just to say, here's the deal. Like, I talk to people under these circumstances. And if you can't honor that and treat me respectfully, I don't have time for this. Like you said, we don't have time for this.
Yeah.
There's all these problems in the world. Like, we don't have time to be arguing with people. We should be having conversations. We should be trying to reach understanding. That's the point of a conversation.
Yeah. And I do want to bring in just one more little facet of this. Is it's not always the people who are on the totally other side of the political perspective that can be so hurtful. We're really good.
That's a great point.
And self-righteousness, is nonpartisan. And a lot of progressive folks have learned the weapons of exclusion and cancel culture and all of that and are now kind of just using them in a different way. So you quote Nadia, who's a dear friend, Nadia Boltz-Weber, when she said, it's a really funny quote, y'all. Liberal Twitter feels like a poorly designed video game in which you never actually play against the other team. All you do is get ranking points by pointing out how your own team members are wrong.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think some of the really hurtful stuff for me has been from folks that I would think that we're going after a lot of the same things, but we're really good at kind of tearing down our own folks. Not that there's an us and them as much, but folks that I feel like I resonate with on a lot of things. And I don't know if you've seen that too, but
it's something I heard a lot from progressive activists that I spoke to, was that there was a lot of this happening, sort of the circular firing squad, and this it's taken this so we're very confused in the United States, and this very well. We're very confused about what it means to be strong, right? So people think, like, even when I say have grace, people are like, oh, that's just the easy way out. That's just so easy, give grace. And to which I always say, if you think practicing grace is easy, you've never practiced grace, because it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Yeah. What's very easy is demonizing and hating and dominating other people, because that's what we have been taught is strong, right? Is telling people off and giving them a piece of your mind and dominating them. So to people, on the left, to be using these like domination tactics on each other, right? It's just like, everybody needs to step back and like, this is what caused the problem in the first place. Like, it's like, we're not going to solve the problem with domination. Like, that's not going to happen. And so, but people have kind of adopted, it's the, like Nietzsche says, if you're going to fight the monster, don't become the monster. Right. And so it's adopting these tactics of exactly the people that you're opposing, and then now using them on each other. And so, versus if you used grace, you could look at the person you disagree with and still be very clear about where you have your disagreements, but you don't feel a need to just destroy them, basically, right? Because that's sort of what happens. It's like, because it's so dualistic. If you're thinking in a dualistic way, it actually makes sense, because the person is all bad, because you can't find a place for the person. If the person's doing this thing, they have to be all bad, versus this person's doing this thing that I really disagree with and I find very harmful, and there's all these other things about them. And it's not, and people, we have such a hard time with that in our culture. And that was one of the first things I had to really unlearn, was just that things are more complicated. They can be both two things at the same time, the both and to, instead of trying to put everybody in a basket, where you can just be like, you're trash, you're garbage, and all this, the way that people talk about each other.
Yeah, I think what came across in your book too is that you hold that kind of non-dualistic thinking, even with your own faith. That two things can be true. The Catholic Church can be patriarchal, and it can also be this amazing conduit of female wisdom and heroes, saints, and and like, the wheat and the weeds can all grow together in the church, in our own hearts, in the world. And you kind of hold that in a very true way. I don't know if you want to say more about your faith, and because it's such a wonderful journey. I mean, y'all got to read it. We can't do everything justice, but you've gone through all these seasons of, joining the evangelical church, now becoming Catholic. And I don't know, like what an authentic faith looks like for you right now, and how it continues to fuel your work.
Yeah, I think that had I not discovered Richard Rohr, I don't know what would have happened, because I was so locked into the dualistic thinking that it just felt like either I have to be all in with everything or I'm out. And I just couldn't get all in with everything. And so I always was feeling, now I don't agree with this. I don't agree with that. I can't. So I guess I just can't do any of it. And as I say it now, it sounds kind of crazy, but at the time, that's just how my brain was operating. And and it was him and Father Martin, Jim Martin, who both really helped me, see, and Father Martin's my spiritual director, saying like, what about mystery?
Yeah.
What about not knowing? What about, and to get to this place where I actually could just be like, and, I've even had some friends say to me, who they'll say, do you consider yourself a Christian? And I'll say, yeah. And they say, well, what does that mean? And I'll be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not going to go like, this is my faith and this is how I practice it. And I'm not going to go through all the little theological like checkpoints with you so you can decide whether or not, I hold all the right theological beliefs, right?
Yeah.
Or how can I believe that, there are different paths to God. Christianity is the paradigm through which I experience it, but I don't think it's any better than any other, how a Muslim experiences God, or how a Jew experiences God, or how a Hindu experiences God. And then people will start saying, but what about this? And what about that? And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's like such an amazing feeling to just say, I don't have to solve that problem.
So good. I was thinking of that verse where it says, you prepare a table in the presence of my enemies, and I started thinking about that in your book. And I thought maybe a part of the last judgment is that we're sitting at a table with our enemies, or the folks that we've disagreed with, or that have opposed so much that we're about. And God asks them how we treated them. Like this person claims to be a follower of Jesus, and we say, love your enemies. You're their enemy. Did they love you? Did Kirsten love you? And I think you do such a wonderful job at embodying that in your words in your book and in all your appearances on TV and your writing of op-eds.
Thank you.
So thanks for this book. And if you haven't read it, y'all check it out, Saving Grace. And anything else you want to say to close us off? And then what we'll do, Kirsten, if it's cool with you, is we'll end the live stream for all you that are leaning in on the socials and whatnot, and just say hi to the folks here on Zoom. But you want any closing words for us, Kirsten?
I just want to say thank you to you for everything that you do. And I'm just so grateful for your voice in the world and everything that you've done, and have been such a living embodiment of, I think, of the Christian faith in a way that we don't get to see a lot. So I'm so grateful for you.
Oh man, now I'm all blushing and everything, but it's awesome. Well, we'll do more of this, but I'm going to honor the hour and say thank you, everybody, for joining us. And again, next month, we'll be doing Diana Butler Bass's book, Freeing Jesus. And there's a bunch of other stuff happening. But for tonight, we'll say, love y'all. Thanks. Thank you so much, Kirsten.
Thank you.
And this is the book again, Saving Grace. So we'll end the live.